The grand chamber of the Galactic Council was filled with light from 100 different suns as the leaders of the known galaxy gathered in a circle of tall silver chairs. Each seat held a figure from a different world, tall ones with crystal skin, short ones with glowing eyes, and many shapes that would seem strange to the human eye. They had gathered for a single reason, a law unlike any they had ever passed before. The air in the chamber was heavy, even though no wind moved, and the sound of quiet voices mixed with the hum of strange machines high above. In the center of the room stood a long table made of black stone, smooth and cold, and on that table was a single sheet of glowing light, a document that carried the words, "No human shall take part in any battle. No human shall join any army. No human shall fight in any war anywhere in the galaxy." The title was bright enough that it made some aliens turn their eyes away, as if the words themselves were dangerous to look at for too long. Many had traveled light years for this moment, and yet no one spoke too loudly. The leaders shifted in their seats, looking at one another with quiet fear, each waiting for someone else to speak first. And when at last a tall, thin figure with silver lines across his skin stood to speak, his voice was low and careful. He said that the ban was for the safety of all worlds. He said it was not against humans alone, but for the good of every species that wished to live without fear of endless war. His words carried across the chamber, but they did not calm the others. Some alien leaders leaned close to their neighbors, whispering with voices that sounded like rustling leaves or deep water. They spoke of humans with the same tone one might use for storms or wildfires. One said humans never stopped once they began to fight. Another said humans did not fear death. And another said humans could not be broken once they decided to win. Each story sounded too strange to believe, yet no one in the chamber laughed, for each of them knew there was truth in those whispers. Near the back of the chamber sat a figure with skin like dark glass, his eyes watching every movement in the room. He remembered the last time humans had fought alongside his people. He remembered how they had charged into the heart of battle without waiting for orders. He remembered the way they had kept fighting even when outnumbered, and how they had kept fighting even after they were wounded. There was no other species that fought in that way. And though they had saved his world, he still woke at night, hearing the echoes of their voices in the dark. The leader of the council, a being of shifting light, raised one long arm and called for silence. The whispers stopped. The air seemed to grow heavier, and the leader spoke of a battle that had taken place many years ago, a battle the records now call the Day of Ash. He did not tell the full story yet, but his voice carried the weight of memory. He said that the galaxy had learned that day that human courage was a weapon that could cut too deep, and that human rage could burn longer than any war itself. One by one, the leaders walked to the black table, each touching the glowing document, their touch adding their seal to the ban. Some did so quickly without looking up. Others hesitated with their hands trembling before they made contact. Each time a seal appeared, the light grew dimmer, as if the document itself wanted to hide from what it now carried. And soon only one chair remained empty. It belonged to the leader of a small water world on the edge of the galaxy. He rose slowly, his eyes meeting the shifting light of the council head, and for a moment he did not move. Around the chamber, the silence grew sharp. Some thought he might refuse, some hoped he would speak, but at last he stepped forward. His hand touched the glowing words, and the final seal appeared. With that, the ban became law across every known star. No human could now take part in battle, and the punishment for breaking the law would be exile from the galaxy. But the council did not tell the full truth that day. They did not speak of the battle that had forced them into this choice. They did not speak of the enemies who had been erased, not just defeated, and they did not speak of the human soldiers who had walked away from that battle with eyes that seemed to see more than any alien could understand. Those truths stayed locked behind heavy doors and guarded minds. For the leaders knew that if the full story spread, some might see the ban not as protection, but as a challenge. As the meeting ended, the chamber emptied slowly, the leaders returning to their ships and their home worlds. The black table stood alone under the cold light, and the glowing document faded until only faint lines remained. Far above, the stars burned quietly, as if the galaxy itself waited for the day when the words on that page would be tested. The sky above the frozen world of Kareth was a swirling sea of black and silver clouds lit by distant lightning as the war raged below. The ground shook with the roar of alien weapons and the cries of soldiers in languages that blended into one long, desperate sound. The Galactic Alliance forces were being pushed back mile by mile, their lines breaking under the relentless advance of the enemy, known as the Drawl. Tall insect, like warriors with armor that could deflect most energy blasts, and claws sharp enough to cut through steel. For weeks the Alliance had fought to hold this world, but every day the Drawl moved closer to victory. And now the enemy's banners were visible from the walls of the last great fortress on Kareth. Inside that fortress, alien commanders gathered in the war room, their faces tense as they watched the glowing tactical map, each red line showing enemy movement bending toward their position like the jaws of a closing trap. One commander with skin like hammered bronze slammed his fist against the table and said their forces could not hold another day. Another spoke of retreat, but there was nowhere left to run. And then the doors to the war room opened and a shadow filled the entrance. A group of humans stepped inside, their armor worn from travel, their eyes sharp and cold. They carried no grand banners, no polished ceremonial gear, only weapons and the steady air of soldiers who had seen too many battles and yet still walked forward. The alien commanders stared in silence, some with hope flickering in their eyes, others with unease, for the humans were not part of the Alliance army. They were volunteers from a faraway world that had joined the war without waiting for orders. The tallest among them was a woman with short dark hair and a long scar across her cheek. She walked straight to the table, looked at the map for a few heartbeats, then spoke in a calm voice, saying the enemy would break within 2 days if they were hit. From a flank at the right moment, an alien officer argued it was impossible as that flank was buried in deep snow and jagged cliffs. The humans only smiled and said they had climbed worse. Within hours, the human squad was moving through the frozen wilderness outside the fortress. The wind screamed through narrow valleys, and the snow cut at their faces like shards of glass. Yet they moved quickly, silent except for the crunch of their boots. They carried little food, trusting they would reach the enemy before hunger slowed them. One of the younger humans laughed softly in the cold and said the Drawl would never expect an attack from this side. Another only muttered that the Drawl would not be given the chance to expect anything. As they neared the enemy camp, the humans did not rush. They studied every ridge and shadow, marking where guards stood, where supply lines ran, where the ground might give them cover. Then when night fell, they struck. Their attack was not a grand charge with banners and drums. It was a sudden storm in the dark, a whisper that became thunder. They moved through the camp like ghosts, cutting lines, destroying supplies, drawing the Drawl into confusion and panic. And when the Drawl tried to regroup, the humans were already gone, leaving fire and chaos behind. The next morning, the Alliance soldiers in the fortress saw smoke rising from the enemy lines. They heard distant explosions and cries, and for the first time in weeks the Drawl advance slowed. The alien commanders did not know how, but they knew something had changed. The humans returned before the second night, their armor scarred and their weapons empty, but their eyes alive with the strange fire that came when they knew they had turned the tide. They did not ask for rest. Instead, they pointed to the map and showed where the enemy was weakest now, where a full attack could break them. The Alliance launched the assault at dawn, their soldiers pushing forward with renewed strength. The humans fought at the front, moving faster than any could follow, striking hard and then disappearing into the chaos. Some alien troops tried to keep pace, but soon found themselves falling behind, unable to match the relentless speed and force. The Drawl began to fall back, their lines bending, and by nightfall the enemy was retreating across the frozen plains. Victory came faster than anyone had believed possible. The Drawl forces on Kareth were shattered, their command destroyed, their survivors fleeing into deep space. The fortress stood untouched, the banners of the Alliance flying once more over its walls, and the commanders praised the courage of all their soldiers. But in their private thoughts they knew the truth. They knew the humans had changed the battle, not just with skill, but with something deeper. A refusal to stop, a hunger to win. That could not be taught. Yet there was a shadow in the victory. for the humans did not stop when the battle ended. While the Alliance forces held their ground and tended to the wounded, the humans chased the retreating Drawl into the icy wastes, following them for days beyond the borders marked on any map. The alien commanders sent orders for them to return, but the orders went unanswered. Scouts reported distant flashes in the night, and the sound of gunfire carried on the wind. No one knew exactly what the humans were doing out there, but the Drawl who escaped the frozen world told a story that spread quickly through the galaxy. They said the humans hunted them like predators, not soldiers. They said there was no negotiation, no mercy, no rest. They said the humans fought as if driven by an ancient and endless rage, and that they would rather face any other enemy than meet those cold human eyes in the dark. Some in the Alliance dismissed these tales as fear speaking through defeated voices. But others remembered the look in the humans' faces when they had returned from the snow, the look of beings who had crossed some invisible line and could not be pulled back. When the last Drawl ship left Karith's orbit, the war there was over, but the memory of what the humans had done remained. Whispers spread in military halls and political chambers, whispers of a force too dangerous to be unleashed freely, and though the official records marked only the victory, the quiet truth was that some in the Alliance were already thinking of ways to keep the humans out of future wars. For if such power could be turned on the enemy, it could one day be turned on allies as well. The great chamber of the Galactic Council was once again filled with the colors and sounds of countless worlds as the leaders gathered under the high ceiling of crystal arches that reflected the light of stars drifting far beyond the walls. The air was heavy with the scent of strange plants brought in from different homeworlds, and the voices that rose and fell carried the weight of both memory and fear. The war on Karith was over, yet its shadow lay across every mind in the chamber, and the question before them was simple yet dangerous. Should the ban on human soldiers become permanent, or should humanity be allowed to fight once more? At the center of the room stood the circular speaking platform where any delegate could step forward to be heard. It was a place where wars had been ended with words and alliances born from promises. But on this day, the atmosphere was different. The air felt sharp, and the silence that often came before great debates was broken not by speeches but by the low murmur of private conversations between nervous leaders. One could hear the hiss of scaled tongues, the clicking of insectoid mandibles, and the soft hum of beings made of living light as they traded quiet thoughts and glances. The representative from the water world of Selker was the first to rise, his form shimmering under the chamber lights, his voice like waves rolling over stone as he said that humans had saved countless lives on Karith, and that it was foolish to waste such skill and courage. He argued that the galaxy needed warriors like them, for the Drawl were not the only threat beyond the borders, and new dangers waited in the dark spaces between the stars. His words were met with polite nods from a few delegates, yet most avoided his gaze, for they knew that courage was not the only thing the humans had shown on Karith. Across the chamber, the representative of the Thalary stood, her tall body draped in silver cloth, her 4 eyes blinking slowly as she spoke in a voice that carried the weight of centuries. She said the galaxy could not risk another day of ash. She said she had seen the battlefield after the humans had finished with the Drawl. She had walked through the snow stained with colors no snow should hold. She had seen the broken machines and the shattered bodies, and she had felt something in the air, a kind of silence that was not peace, but warning. She told the council that such a thing could never be allowed to happen again. Murmurs spread like wind through dry leaves. Some delegates nodded, others frowned, but all listened, and when the Thalary finished speaking, the council head invited the next voice to step forward. This time, it was a small and hunched figure from the forest world of Nara, his eyes like dark seeds peering from beneath a hood of green fibers. He spoke softly, yet his words carried across the room. He said that humans did not fight for orders or honor or glory. They fought for survival, and when survival was at stake, they would burn the sky itself if they thought it would keep them alive. And he warned that such a force was beyond the control of any law once unleashed. At this, the representative of Earth finally stood, a tall man in a simple dark uniform, his voice calm, yet firm, as he reminded the Council that humanity had bled alongside the Alliance on countless worlds, that without them Kareth would have fallen, and that they had asked for nothing in return but the chance to stand against the enemy. He said that to ban humans from combat was to tell them they were untrustworthy allies, and that such a wound would not heal easily. His words hung in the air, like the tension before a storm, yet no one rushed to answer. The Council head, a being whose form shifted between light and shadow, spoke then, not to take a side but to share a story that few in the room had heard. It was the story of the final hours on Kareth, when the humans had pursued the fleeing Drawl beyond the lines of battle. The head spoke of messages sent to recall them, messages that were ignored, and of reports from scouts who found nothing but burning wreckage where Drawl ships had been. The head told of an unconfirmed account from a captured Drawl soldier who claimed that the humans had not simply chased the enemy, they had hunted them until none remained, and that even in surrender the Drawl had found no mercy. The chamber grew still as the head's voice echoed away, the light above dimming as if the story itself had drawn the warmth from the room. Some delegates shifted uneasily, their minds painting pictures of what such a hunt might look like. Others stared at the human representative as if seeing him in a new and unsettling way. The human's jaw was tight, yet his eyes held steady. He said nothing, and in that silence, many heard an answer more powerful than words. One by one delegates spoke their minds, some urging caution, some pleading for trust. But as the hours passed, it became clear that fear was the stronger voice in the room. Not fear of humans as enemies, but fear of humans as weapons. Weapons that might one day turn without warning. A few spoke of ways to limit their role in battle rather than ban them entirely. Yet these ideas fell away, as others reminded the Council of the chaos humans could bring even in small numbers. The memory of Kareth was too fresh, the stories too vivid. In the far corner of the chamber, an old warrior from the desert world of Tyros finally rose, his body marked with the scars of 100 battles. He had fought beside humans once long ago, and he said he had never met soldiers more loyal, more willing to risk themselves for allies. Yet he also said that in the heat of battle they changed, their eyes became those of predators, and they saw nothing but the path to victory no matter what it cost. He told the Council that such a gift was also a danger, and that the galaxy might not survive if it ever stood in the path of that predator's gaze. By the time the last voice had spoken, the light above the chamber had faded into the deep blue of evening. The Council head called for silence, and then for the vote. Each delegate placed a hand upon the silver rail before them, and let their mark appear on the great central display. One by one the symbols lit up, some in favor of the ban, some against. Yet as the final marks appeared, the decision was clear. The ban would remain, and it would be made permanent. Humans would never again fight in the wars of the Alliance. The human representative stood for a long moment in the quiet that followed, his face unreadable. Then he turned and walked from the chamber without a word, the sound of his boots on the polished floor echoing until the great doors closed behind him. And though the delegates began to leave in twos and threes, speaking softly of the vote, none of them could shake the feeling that something had been set in motion beyond their control. A feeling like distant thunder waiting just beyond the horizon, unseen yet certain to arrive. The wind screamed over the jagged mountains of the outer rim world of Aurelia, carrying with it the scent of ash and the distant echo of war. Far below, in the shadow of a frozen valley, a column of Drawl forces moved in tight formation, their armor gleaming under the pale sun. They were retreating from a failed strike on an Alliance outpost, yet their pace was slow, as if they feared something more than the Alliance soldiers who pursued them. The snow crunched under their heavy steps, and the steam of their breath hung in the cold air like ghosts following close behind. High above on the cliffs, a small group of human soldiers moved silently from rock to rock, their eyes locked on the enemy column. They had been told by the Alliance command to hold their ground and let the Drawl escape beyond the borders. The war on Aurelia was ending, and a ceasefire had been agreed upon, yet none of the humans spoke of going back. They had lost friends in the last assault, friends whose bodies still lay buried beneath the ice. And for them the war would not end until the Drawl were gone forever. At the front of the group was the same scar-faced woman who had led the flanking strike on Kareth. Her breath came slow and steady in the thin air, her gaze fixed on the narrow pass where the Drawl would soon enter, a place where the high walls of ice left no room for escape. She gave a single hand signal, and her squad began to move down the slope like shadows, sliding over the snow, their weapons ready, their steps measured. They did not rush, for they knew the moment for killing would come soon. Enough! The Drawl entered the pass unaware of the danger above, their voices carrying in harsh clicks and low growls as they spoke to one another. Some glanced behind them, as if sensing a presence, yet saw nothing but white cliffs and falling snow. Then, without warning, the first shot came from the ridge, a single sharp sound that echoed like a crack in the ice. A Drawl warrior fell, and before the others could react, the humans were among them, their attack fast and merciless, moving with a precision that seemed less like battle and more like the work of hunters closing in on prey. The fighting in the pass was short but brutal. The narrow space gave the Drawl no room to spread out and no place to hide. Every movement they made was met by a human strike. The air was filled with the sharp smell of scorched metal and the deeper iron scent of blood. When the last Drawl fell, the humans did not stop to rest or gather trophies. They began searching the bodies for maps and data. Then, without a word, they set off down the trail the enemy had come from, following it deeper into the mountains. The trail led them to a hidden camp carved into the side of a glacier, guarded by only a handful of Drawl scouts who were quickly dispatched. Inside they found not just soldiers, but civilians, families of the enemy who had fled the front lines. The humans paused only for a heartbeat before moving through the camp. Their orders from their leader were clear: leave nothing that could one day return to the war. Some of the younger soldiers hesitated, yet the older ones pushed forward, their faces set like stone. And soon the camp was silent, except for the whisper of the wind through broken walls. By the time the humans emerged from the glacier, the sky above Aurelia had turned the color of bruised steel. A storm was coming. Yet they pressed on, driving their path toward the last known position of the Drawl High Command. Their pace was relentless. They did not stop for food or sleep, only brief pauses to drink melted snow or reload their weapons, their eyes fixed always ahead as if pulled by an invisible thread. The scar-faced woman at their lead never once looking back. Far away, the Alliance Command Center on Aurelia received scattered reports from scouts about human movements deep in forbidden territory. Messages were sent ordering them to return, then warnings, then direct commands from high-ranking officers. Yet none were answered. Frustration turned to alarm as new reports came in: Drawl outposts burning, supply lines cut, and entire units wiped out without survivors. The humans were no longer part of the war. They were something else, a force moving with its own purpose beyond the control of any council or command. When the humans finally reached the Drawl command base, it was hidden beneath layers of ice and rock, protected by heavy defenses and a network of tunnels, the kind of fortress that could hold out against an army for weeks. Yet the humans did not bring an army. They brought silence and shadows, slipping in under cover of the storm, using explosives to collapse tunnels and drive the defenders into choke points where they could be picked off one by one. The Drawl fought with desperate fury, yet the humans answered with a cold focus that never wavered. And as the battle dragged on, the defenders began to realize they were not fighting soldiers bound by the rules of war, but predators who had come for the kill. When the last of the Drawl command fell, the humans moved through the base methodically, destroying equipment, burning records, and making certain that no one who could rebuild the chain of command would live to see another dawn. Outside, the storm howled, and the snow fell in thick, heavy sheets, burying the tracks of the attackers even as they left. And by the time the Alliance forces arrived days later, the base was nothing but ruins half swallowed by ice, the bodies frozen in positions that spoke of their final moments. The official report filed by the Alliance described the fall of the Drawl command as the result of enemy sabotage. The humans were not mentioned, their actions erased from the record. Yet those who had seen the aftermath knew the truth. They spoke in quiet tones of the precision of the attack, of the way every exit had been sealed, every weapon disabled, every leader killed. It was not a battle, they said, it was an ending. News of what had happened on Aurelia spread slowly at first, carried by whispers in military barracks and the private words of officers who had fought long enough to recognize the signs. Some called it necessary, saying the draw would have returned if not for the humans. Others called it madness, warning that no ally should hold such power without restraint. And in the council chambers, far from the ice and snow, the decision to keep the ban on human soldiers was no longer a question, but an unshakable certainty. Yet even as the galaxy moved on, the humans who had walked through the storm on Virelia carried with them a memory that could not be erased, the feeling of standing at the edge of something larger than war itself, the knowledge that they had crossed a line from which there was no return, and somewhere in the quiet spaces between stars they knew they would be called upon again, not by orders or treaties, but by the simple truth that when danger rises, there are some who cannot turn away no matter the cost. If you want, I can now make Part 5 even more intense. Exactly 1,200 words without any dots, where the truth about humans begins to spread like wildfire across the galaxy, cementing their terrifying reputation. The hall was vast and silent, filled with an air so heavy it seemed to weigh upon the lungs itself. Every torch that lined the black stone walls burned with a faint bluish flame, casting an unnatural glow over the chamber, and every flicker seemed to paint strange symbols on the ceiling, as if unseen hands were writing in the air. The accused stood in the center on a raised circular platform that was etched with sigils glowing faintly beneath his boots. His wrists were bound by bands that were not metal nor rope, but something older, like woven strands of midnight itself, twisting and pulsing faintly, as if alive. The crowd that ringed the chamber was unlike any gathering he had ever seen. There were figures cloaked in silks that shimmered like liquid moonlight beside others draped in armor fashioned from the shells of creatures that could not have been born in any sea of earth. Their faces were hidden, their eyes dim glimmers beneath deep hoods or masks carved into strange forms. The silence was not merely the absence of sound. It was a force pressing down from the high vaulted arches above, as if the very air demanded obedience. From the far end of the hall, the sound of footsteps began to echo, slow and deliberate. Each step carried a weight of centuries, until the figure emerged, a woman tall, beyond measure, clad in robes that shifted between shades of crimson and shadow. Her hair hung in long braided strands the color of night, but her eyes were molten gold, burning with a light that was not entirely of this world. She was the arbiter chosen by the circle to preside over matters where life, death, and the threads of fate itself were woven into one. Her gaze fell upon the accused, and for a moment the room felt colder, as if she had drawn the heat away with the simple weight of her presence. The arbiter spoke in a voice that was not loud, yet filled every corner of the chamber like a tide, filling every crevice. She named him not as a man, but as a trespasser, one who had walked through a gate never meant to be found, let alone crossed. She spoke of the theft not of gold nor jewels, but of something far older, a relic of thought and will that bound two realms together. The charge was treason, not against a crown, but against the balance that kept worlds apart. The accused raised his head, his eyes defiant, though the bonds seemed to constrict with every heartbeat. He spoke not in pleading, but in challenge. He told them that the relic had not been stolen, but reclaimed, for it had been forged by his kind before the circle had even been born. His words carried an edge as sharp as the cold wind that seemed to sweep through the hall, though no door had opened. He spoke of truths buried under centuries of rewritten histories, of shadows cast not by those who resisted, but by those who ruled. A murmur rippled through the gathered figures, a sound like dry leaves stirring in a windless room. The arbiter listened without shifting her stance, and when his voice fell silent, she raised one long hand, and the floor beneath them began to change. The sigils under his feet glowed brighter, the lines twisting and reforming into shapes that writhed like living things. The platform lowered, carrying him into a pit where the air shimmered, as though the walls themselves were made of heat and light. This was the trial of shadows, a place where words were weighed not by ears, but by the will of the realm itself. Here memories could be pulled from the mind and laid bare like pages of an unbound book, and here lies were not spoken, but lived until they crumbled. The arbiter descended after him, her golden eyes casting light into the shifting darkness. The walls around them became fluid, and within them images began to form. His past was drawn forth not as he told it, but as it had been lived moments of Joy and loss, battles fought, and bargains struck faces of friends and enemies, alike some were as he remembered them, but others were different, their edges sharp in ways he had never noticed before. The trial did not ask for confession, nor for proof. It sought the pattern of truth itself, woven between the threads of all that had been done, and left undone the realm, bent time, folding years into heartbeats. As they walked through his life scene by scene, the arbiter asked nothing, yet every glance was a question, and every silence an answer. They saw the night. He crossed the gate, and the sky had split into ribbons of fire. They saw the moment he had touched the relic, its surface rippling under his fingers like water over glass. They saw the choice he had made when the voices offered him two paths, one of return and one of rebellion. At last the visions began to fade, the walls solidifying into the smooth black stone of the chamber. Once more the platform rose, carrying them back to the surface, and the crowd awaited the judgment. The arbiter stood before him, her expression unreadable for a long moment. No sound passed. And then she spoke in the same quiet voice that seemed to move through the bones as much as the air. She told him that the truth he carried was dangerous, not because it was false, but because it was whole. That wholeness cut through the careful illusions that held the realms apart, and a wound like that could never be easily closed. The circle would not condemn him to death for such an end, would only turn his truth into legend. Instead, they would bind him to the very edge of the realms where the worlds touched, but did not meet. He would be forced to walk that border, endlessly, neither within nor without. His steps would trace the seam of reality itself, and he would see both realms always yet touch neither. For some this might have been mercy, but he knew it was a sentence that would grind the soul into dust over endless years. Two masked sentinels stepped forward, their armor glinting faintly in the blue light. They placed their hands upon the living bonds, and they writhed, tightening before dissolving in a smoke that wrapped around his wrists again, and then sank into his skin, leaving black marks that burned faintly like coals. He was led from the hall, past the rows of silent figures, past the torches that bent toward him as he passed, and out into the open where the sky churned with colors no mortal dawn had ever seen. A path stretched before him, a narrow line of stone that seemed to hang in the air, without end one side, falling into a storm of shadows, the other into a sea of light. The sentinels did not follow. They stopped at the threshold and watched as he stepped forward onto the path. Each step sent a faint tremor through the line, as if the border itself acknowledged his presence. He looked once over his shoulder to the hall that was already fading into the distance, and then ahead to the horizon that was no horizon at all, but a fold in the fabric of the world. He did not know if he would ever find a way to unmake the sentence, or if the path would eventually consume him entirely, but he knew that the relic was still out there, its call faint but unbroken, and as long as that call endured, so too would he. The alien vessel loomed in the silent void, its massive frame casting shadows over the shattered remains of human and alien ships that drifted aimlessly in the darkness. Inside the control chamber, the human survivor stood tall, his uniform torn, yet his eyes burning with the fire of relentless defiance. The alien leader, a towering figure with skin that shimmered like molten silver, observed him with a mixture of caution and fascination. For weeks, they had tried to break him with mental probes, with physical trials that pushed the limits of endurance, and with illusions meant to make him surrender, but he had resisted each one, not through brute strength alone, but with a cunning that the aliens had underestimated. Now the alien leader moved closer, its steps echoing in the metallic chamber. "You are the only one of your kind left here," it said in a voice that was almost a whisper, yet carried the weight of authority. "You have seen the fate of your comrades, and yet you continue to resist." Why? The human tilted his head slightly, his voice calm. "Because surrender is not in my blood. You can take my body, you can destroy my home, but you cannot make me kneel." The alien paused, studying the human, as if seeing something it could not quite define. In its long existence across countless worlds, it had encountered many species and many warriors, but never one who defied the inevitability of defeat with such conviction. The alien leader motioned for the restraints to be removed. The guards hesitated, but obeyed. The human rubbed his wrists, but did not move away. He met the leader's gaze and saw for the first time a flicker of uncertainty. It was then that the human realized something vital. The aliens, though powerful, feared something. They feared the human spirit. The leader gestured toward a large viewport, revealing the battlefield outside. Wreckage drifted through space, while distant explosions painted brief bursts of light against the infinite black. The leader spoke again. Your people fought well, but they are scattered now. The war is lost. The human smiled faintly without breaking the intensity of his stare. Lost is a word you use when you believe the fight is over. But for us, the fight never ends. It changes, it adapts, and it waits for the moment to strike again. You think I am alone here, but I am not. Every star out there, every fragment of debris, every memory of those who stood with me is part of the fight. The alien tilted its head, as if considering a new perspective. The human's words were seeds, and though the alien leader tried to dismiss them, they began to root in the cracks of its certainty. A sudden alarm blared through the chamber. Red lights bathed the walls in a pulsating glow. The leader turned sharply, demanding a report. An alien officer rushed forward, breathless with urgency. Unknown energy signatures approaching from the outer perimeter. The human felt a spark ignite within him. He knew his people would not abandon him. They were coming not for rescue alone, but to send a message that humanity does not vanish quietly. The leader issued rapid orders in its own language. The ship shifted its formation, defensive shields rising like shimmering walls of light. But the human noticed something. The leader's tone had changed. There was tension, there hesitation. It was beginning to doubt. The alien leader looked back at him. This changes nothing, it said. But the human could see otherwise. He stepped closer, his voice low, but filled with steel. It changes everything, because now you see what you feared from the beginning, that we are not broken, that even in the darkest void, we find a way to fight. Through the viewport, the approaching human fleet emerged, sleek vessels bearing the scars of countless battles, yet still moving with precision. They unleashed a coordinated barrage against the alien defenses, forcing the massive vessel to shudder under the impact. The leader barked more commands, but the human saw that its warriors were struggling, their confidence shaken, their formations breaking. The human knew this was the moment. He turned to the guards, his voice commanding, "Stand down, this fight is no longer yours." The guards hesitated, glancing at their leader, then at the human. Something in his presence, something in the unyielding way he carried himself, made them falter. The alien leader saw it too. The seeds of defiance were spreading not just among humans, but among its own kind. A deep rumble shook the ship as another volley struck. The human fleet was relentless, refusing to let the enemy regain control. The leader finally spoke, its tone quieter. "Now you would have made a great warrior among us," the human replied. "Perhaps, but I was born to fight for my own." The leader studied him one last time before issuing an order to open a channel to the human fleet. The human stepped forward, speaking into the calm. "This is Captain of the Resistance to the fleet. Focus fire on the forward weapons array and keep pressure on the shields. We are close." The battle outside intensified, beams of energy crisscrossing the void like threads of light, weaving a tapestry of defiance. The alien vessel groaned under the assault parts of its hull, breaking away into the abyss. The leader stood silently watching as its seemingly invincible ship began to falter. The human could almost sense the weight of centuries of conquest beginning to crumble in that moment. With a final coordinated strike, the human fleet breached the alien defenses. Explosions ripped through the massive vessel, shaking the chamber violently. The leader steadied itself, but the human stood unflinching. He had survived. Worse, the guards abandoned their posts, some fleeing, others simply lowering their weapons. The human stepped toward the leader. "This is the part where you decide whether your people live to see another day, or whether this becomes your tomb." The leader's gaze held his for a long moment. Then it gave the command to cease fire on the human fleet. The order rippled through the alien ranks, confusion and relief mingling in their expressions. The battle slowed, then stopped. Ships drifted in uneasy silence, the void filled only with the faint crackle of damaged comms. The human exhaled slowly but did not relax. He knew this was not the end. The leader turned to him. "You have won this battle, but the war remains." The human nodded. "That is how we prefer it. because as long as the war remains, so do we. He walked toward the viewport, watching his fleet regroup in the distance. They had come through the fire and the darkness, and they were still here. The leader spoke one final time. I will remember this human, and I will tell my kind of the day. We met one who would not bow. The human turned slightly, his voice steady. Remember it well, because one day we will meet again, and when that day comes, you will know exactly why we are feared. The leader did not respond, only watched as the human signaled his fleet to prepare for extraction. Moments later, a transport vessel docked, and the human boarded, stepping into the familiar hum of human technology. As the hatch closed behind him, he allowed himself a single deep breath, not of relief, but of readiness for what lay ahead. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly, each one a silent witness to the truth he carried. Humanity was not just surviving, was enduring, and as long as it endured, it could never truly be defeated. The darkness around Alex had grown heavier, like the air itself was alive and pressing in on him, whispering in voices that were not voices, weaving through his mind with promises of escape. If only he would listen, if only he would surrender, but he knew better. He knew these were the same alien whispers that had tried to twist his thoughts before, the same murmurs that had driven other captives to madness, and he would not fall like them. The chamber was no longer the same bright cell he had been thrown into weeks ago. It had transformed into something far more menacing, walls shifting in subtle patterns like breathing creatures, as if the entire structure was alive and aware of his presence. He could feel it studying him, tasting his fear, and somewhere deep in the shadows, he could hear the slow, steady hum of alien machinery. Or maybe something far worse, the captors had stopped bringing food days ago, perhaps to weaken him before whatever final experiment they had planned. But hunger was nothing compared to the gnawing ache of uncertainty. He needed answers. He needed to know why he was still alive when so many others were gone, and he suspected the answer was tied to the strange energy he had begun to feel within himself, a heat that surged in moments of anger or desperation, as if something inside him was awakening, something the aliens feared or desired, or maybe both. The silence broke when the wall in front of him rippled and opened like a wound, revealing a corridor lit in pulses of red and blue. And without thinking, Alex stepped forward, drawn by a force he could not name. His bare feet touched the cold, shifting surface, and it felt like walking on something half solid, half liquid, with each step pulling him deeper into the unknown. The corridor twisted not in straight lines, but in strange organic curves like the inside of some great beast, and the lights shifted faster, the hum growing louder, until he realized it was not a machine at all, but a heartbeat, an impossibly vast heartbeat resonating through the walls and floor and ceiling, as if he were inside the body of something that could swallow a city whole. He reached a vast chamber unlike anything he had seen before, a cathedral of alien design, towering arches formed of bone-like structures that glistened with veins of light, and in the center a pool of black liquid that reflected nothing, not even him. And yet when he stared into it, he saw movement, shapes writhing in the dark depths, as if the pool led to another world. A figure emerged from the far side of the chamber, tall, impossibly thin, draped in layers of what seemed like living cloth that shifted and writhed around its frame. It had no face, only a smooth surface where its features should have been, and yet Alex felt its gaze burn into him with a weight that made his knees tremble. It spoke without sound, and yet the meaning was clear. You are not like the others. You are the fracture, the break in the pattern we have been waiting for. The words were not a statement, but a truth pressed into his mind, and before he could respond, the figure lifted one impossibly long hand, and the pool began to churn violently. From it rose images flashing faster than he could process, scenes of Earth, cities, burning skies, split open by fire, oceans boiling under alien suns, and in the midst of it all he saw himself standing against a tide of creatures that blotted out the horizon. The vision shifted again, and he saw the chamber. They were in collapsing walls, folding in on themselves as something vast and unseen consumed everything. The figure stepped closer, and Alex felt that strange inner heat flare, like a flame feeding on his fear, but also on something deeper, determination, rage, or refusal to be what they wanted him to be. He realized then that they were trying to push him towards something, to shape him into a weapon, or perhaps in a bait for something even greater. The figure placed its hand on his chest, and in that instant the heat inside him exploded, flooding his mined with alien symbols, maps of constellations, and hidden routes through galaxies he had never heard of, and in the center of it all a single point of blinding light that seemed to pulse in time. With his own heartbeat, the figure withdrew, and the pool stilled, its voice returning in his mind. You will go there, you will do what we cannot. And if you succeed, your world may survive. But if you fail, it will be as if it never existed. Before he could protest, the floor beneath him liquefied, and he was pulled downward into the black liquid, sinking faster and faster as cold wrapped around him, until he could no longer tell up from down. His lungs screamed for air, but just as he thought he would drown, the darkness shattered, and he was standing on solid ground again. But this was no place. He knew the sky above was a swirling storm of green and silver lightning striking mountains that glowed from within, rivers of molten glass cutting through valleys filled with forests of crystal that hummed in strange harmonies. He could feel the pull of that single point of light, the destination the figure had burned into his mind, and he knew, without understanding how, that this was only the beginning. As he began walking, he realized the ground beneath him was not earth or stone, but something alive reacting to his footsteps, sending ripples outward that changed the landscape, subtly hills, shifting rivers redirecting, as if the entire world was conscious and watching his progress. Shapes moved in the distance, not human, not even close, towering silhouettes, with too many limbs moving in ways that defied logic, yet there was no malice in there. Movements, only curiosity. One of them approached its form, constantly shifting from solid to translucent and back again, and when it stopped before him, it lowered itself until its many eyes were level with his own. It spoke not in words, but in images, showing him a path through the storm toward a structure that rose like a shard of night itself into the swirling sky. He moved quickly, knowing instinctively that time was running out. The storm above seemed to follow him, its lightning growing closer, the winds pulling at him as if trying to drag him back. But that heat inside him flared brighter with each step until it felt like his very bones were on fire. When he finally reached the structure, he found no doors, only a narrow slit just wide enough for him to squeeze through, and inside was a vast hollow space lit by a single sphere of blinding white light suspended in the air, its pulse matching his own heartbeat. The moment he stepped closer, the light expanded, engulfing him, and he felt every memory, every fear, every hope stripped away until there was nothing left but the raw will to survive. And in that emptiness, a voice spoke, different from the figure's voice, deeper, older. We have waited for the fracture. We have waited for the one who could break their chains. And now you stand here. The light pressed into him, filling every part of him until he felt he would burst. And then, in a blinding flash, it was gone, leaving him alone in the dark. But he knew something had changed. He was no longer the same man who had stumbled through that first corridor. He could feel the storm outside, bending around him, as if afraid to touch him. And far in the distance, he could hear the vast heartbeat again, this time in perfect sync with his own. And with that realization came a truth that chilled him to his core. He was no longer just fighting to escape. He was now part of something far larger than himself, something that would decide not just his fate, but the fate of everything.